Hey, welcome to another episode of the South Texas Power Lunch. Today, my guests are David and Amanda Webb from Atlas Retirement Strategies. And here we're going to talk about succession planning. We're going to talk about buy sell agreements and what happens when disaster strikes or what happens when you want to transition your business. These are things that people don't think about until usually their options are limited or worse, tragedy strikes and they just have to deal with the consequences. Join me here as we go and talk today about succession planning with Amanda and David. We are here with David and Amanda Webb from Atlas Retirement Strategies. And this is going to be a great conversation about succession planning and what you need to be thinking about on exiting your business. Or maybe you're thinking about buying a business and you want to understand maybe what a potential seller would be going through. So, this is going to be a great conversation. Amanda, David, thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. We look forward
So,
to this.
as we get started here, why don't you tell us about Atlas Retirement Strategies? What does Atlas do for its clients?
We are a holistic planning firm. We work with a broad range of people based upon our advisors, their needs, our team. Um, but we're really in the business of trying to help people plan, prepare, and protect for the future.
Now, this is a family business, right?
It is a family business. My
So
wife and I are partners.
that's great. And again, it's always amazing. We have a lot of clients that are family businesses, and those are really strong. So again, thank you all both for being here. Let's talk before I get started, we're going to be talking about some specific items around succession planning. And for those of you that are watching that watch a lot of our podcasts and our social media, this is for educational purposes only. We're going to be talking about our own opinions. We're going to be talking about things really in general to help educate you, but you need to consult the right lawyers, tax professionals, and professionals like Atlas Retirement Strategies to understand what it really means for you. Because, David, man, I'm sure you've never done the same strategy twice, just like we've never done the same deal twice. It always depends and it's always unique. So, along that, from a succession planning, what do you experience with your clients with regard to their needs for succession planning? Where does that conversation start?
That's a great question. It really varies because a lot of the time we will get people who come to us because they'll say, I'm thinking of X. I may want to get out of my business. I may want to transition this to a family member, a key person in our organization, or even an external sale. All very different conversations. Again, no two businesses are identical. So, like you said, no two strategies are the same, but some may contain similar components.
Mhm. Nice. When it comes to succession planning, what are the type of objectives that to give some guardrails, some direction to those conversations? What key objectives do you have conversations with your clients about for succession planning?
Typically, what do they want to achieve ideally? And that can be, for example, I would like to transition this to my son. It's a family business transition. We would ask, what's your timeline?
Okay.
When would you like this to occur? Is this when you achieve a certain age? Is it a certain milestone that they hit that gives them gives you a warm fuzzy that they can now do this? Um, but the thing that people don't think about a lot of the time is what happens if that transition has to occur because of a situation,
Right.
a medical situation, God forbid, a death, a financial situation. And that's what we really want to highlight is look at those things. That way you can be planned and prepared so that it's not a surprise and the business that you've built has the ability to continue on.
When do you typically, well, I guess there's two questions here. When's the right time to start having the conversation about succession planning? But the second question to that is when do you usually have that conversation with your clients? Like when do they usually come to you?
The right time, ideally, is if you have 10 years to plan and properly structure and prepare, it allows you the ability to put in funding mechanisms that allow these transitions to happen that don't hurt the business, aren't going to be difficult to accomplish. When it typically happens is very short window.
Mhm.
I would say 3 years and less, commonly 1 year,
Right.
where something has happened to suddenly necessitate a, wow, I need to look at moving this in a different direction. And when that occurs, it's now somewhat frustrating,
Sure.
both on our side because we could see how it could have been accomplished with good planning,
Mhm.
but also on the business owner's side because they didn't realize there were so many things to get done.
Well, for us here at the South Texas Business Lawyers, we look at not really planning, but dealing with disasters. I think we had talked about this before. I mean, I always tell people you need to think about the 4 Ds when you set up your company right from the beginning. These are things that really you can't control. Death, can't control that. What happens to the company at that point in time? I mean, from an ownership, from a governance, those sort of standpoints. Disability, that may or may not matter for a company, but to think about that because, it could be an illness, it could be something that's physical that stops somebody, it could be permanent or temporary. And then a divorce, which divorce has somewhat of control, but your spouse can actually control the other part of that. So it really is something that's out of control, which can change the dynamics and really destroy a lot of businesses too, if there's not that thought about what happens if one of my co-founders, co-owners gets divorced, or what if I get a divorce. The last one is deal. And that's really, some of the proactive things that you're talking about is exit strategies, transitions to family members, those sort of things. And one of the things that adds another layer of complexity is when there's more than one owner and they're not related, not married, right? Third party ownership that comes into play. Because, if that is the plan right from the beginning to transfer and you have somebody that's not in that family, that can be very difficult, but there can be mechanisms in place on that. From a kind of the steps and what you take people from. When we look at people a lot at the beginning when they start, what are the steps that you take people through to help them try to identify their needs and their strategies for succession planning?
Ideally, if we could be there at the beginning, that would be great as well. But typically, we aren't.
Right.
Typically, we catch people when they've already been in business for a while. They may have certain things in place already, whether it be a buy sell agreement, whether it be some type of um, corporate addendum that dictates what would happen in some situations.
Sure.
But typically, our initial step is to look at whatever legal documents they have prepared and understand where they are at that time. And then from there, look at where they may need to go forward. So, again, asking some of those questions: what would you like to achieve?
Hmm.
What is your timeline to achieve this? Do you want this business to be held by your family? Do you want it to stay within the group of partnership that you have or larger group of ownership? Or is this something that when it transitions, you may be looking external? So we ask those type of questions, and then we start looking at where those gaps are and help them identify the gaps and show them possible solutions to help them meet their goals.
Nice. From that transition, you talk about, whether it's a third party, people that are going to exit, that has its own unique challenges that come from that because now you've got a complete independent third party that's coming into the company. But from a successor standpoint, we hear a lot about, second and third generation, companies. And the reality is, I mean, the statistics say, the chances of it getting to the third generation are slim to none for that. Most of the time, companies die in the second generation, but we've got, some good examples. I'm sure you do too, of multi generational families that have continued on that. What do you think is the indication of success in doing some sort of generational succession transition? What do you think sets somebody up for success if they're going to leave it to their kids?
One, that it's clearly defined how they want to leave it to their kids.
What do you mean by that?
Much like a generic I love you will,
Okay.
we find that a lot of business thoughts and processes are, well, you're my family member, so I just want to go ahead and, you're next in line. But it's never really defined who's next in line.
Okay.
A lot of times they could also have more than one choice. And it's defining what choice, it's defining, what product would be best in that situation. So there's a lot more that's entailed of just, I think I'm just going to leave it to my kids. Well,
Mm.
you have 4 kids, you know.
Let's dive into this a little bit more because I'm curious on this. I mean, we've got clients that are, families that have it. So, from a legal standpoint, um, we in our documents, if it's an LLC or even a corporation, we can control the ownership and the governance
Mhm.
of that. But to a lot of times in my conversations with, owners, let's say they have 3 kids. I've got 3, so that's easiest, right? All 3 kids are on the board with them.
Mhm.
Well, again, when dad's gone or mom's gone, and now the 3 kids are there, even leaving a will
Mhm.
to that still leaves it to corporate governance. What do you
Right.
guys do to kind of help someone understand how to, again, leave that business in a way that sets them that their wishes can actually be executed on? Because a will, we can go down to the courthouse
Right.
and have a judge, go through probate to get the wishes of a will to be executed. But business is that's not that easy, actually. What do you
Mhm.
guys talk to business owners about for that?
One, how important is it to keep it in your family?
Hmm.
And what are the relationships of your family in the business? Because sometimes, with your example, you'll find that there's 3 kids. One is heavily involved,
Right.
one is moderately involved, and one has never been involved,
Right.
but they still sit on the board.
That's right.
They all have equal shares.
Right.
And in addition to looking at where those 3 children lie themselves,
Hmm.
you have to look at where do their spouses lie
Right.
Yeah.
and what influence is going to be there. Because if we're using the third uninvolved person
Right.
and a spouse is there, and again, the parent passes away, and here's this transition occurring, the uninvolved person may get a lot of pressure to cash out.
That's right.
Mhm.
Or the uninvolved person can suddenly say, I'm
It's
involved.
my turn to run it.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, in a third,
It-
right? As I tell people, if you set things up equally, and you leave it to your kids, well, you just like the kids would gang up and pick on the other one when they were
Mhm.
little, they might do that with the business when they get done because it
Oh,
just takes 2 out of 3
absolutely.
to have a majority.
but
So it's a challenge, right? To
it
go through
is.
that.
And one of the things we really get people trying to think about is think of an equitable distribution, not an equal distribution.
Mm,
And equitable meaning who is going to help the continuation of this business move forward,
sure.
and think of another type of mechanism or funding mechanism that may allow the buyout of a less interested party.
Talk more about that.
So that's where we find many times it's lacking in businesses. People a lot of times have legal documents, like you were saying, on this is how it runs now.
Right.
And here are the people that are next in line.
Ooh, I'm going to tell you, most of the clients we deal with in the small to medium sized business have legal documents, but it doesn't talk
Then
about the
define
second
that.
piece.
Mhm.
It's a
It,
legal document. They went on Legal Match. I mean, excuse me, Legal Zoom or something like that, but they've never thought through, even at that level, in our experience, the death,
Mhm.
disability, divorce, and deal from just a corporate document
Yeah.
standpoint.
Well, unfortunately, first and foremost thought is, well, I just need to cover myself with this legal document.
That's right.
And that's
Liability,
really, yeah,
liability
exactly. And
protection,
that's,
check a box so that way you can't sue me personally.
mhm.
I agree. That is number one,
And then
what
the
people
thought
see the purpose
process,
of it
yeah, the
is.
thought process after that is not, okay, well, now that I have this, how is it going to work? How is it going to be funded? Who is it going to go to? How, all the other questions that as professionals, we know to ask, we've seen it, we know what to do next.
Right.
Unfortunately, sometimes we just don't get to that specific owner until it's a little later,
Right.
and then we're
Well,
figuring things out.
and if it's a single owner, right, makes it a little bit easier from a legal documentation standpoint because there's no third parties.
Right.
But the truth is, and this again, this is not legal advice. This is just conversations I have. A lot of times I tell people when they're starting their business, I'm like, okay, when you die, what
Mhm.
happens?
Yeah.
Right? Is the reality, is it a professional services business where you're the secret sauce? And if you're the secret sauce and you're dead, well, the reality is this business is over with. But that doesn't mean that the value and the worth that you created can't do something with a key man policy that allows
Mhm.
for your estate to go, thanks, dad. Thanks, mom, for those sort of things,
Right.
which I think a lot of people miss, even when, for that type of thing. Because, well, okay, you die. And I mean, I have a law firm. If I were to die, my kids actually can't even take this
Right.
because they're not licensed attorneys.
Right.
Right. But if there's a way for cash to come out, through a key man policy or something, I can actually use the value of this business that we've created for my kids, but they never think about that. Do you
Mm.
experience that too, even for the solopreneurs and professional services and those?
all the time.
Unfortunately,
And
yes.
and typically it's the solo
Right.
owner that has less of that in place
Mm.
Mhm.
because again they're thinking I just need what's going on right now.
Right.
I can take care of what I need to right now.
Right.
And when you own a business, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, it's very easy to get caught in building the business
Yeah.
and to continue to just go, go, go. And you look up and it's 20 years later.
Hmm.
And you've never done some of the things you probably thought you wanted to
Hmm.
because it's keep it going, meet payroll, build my team, develop products, get it to distribution, do all these things.
Hmm.
Um, and that's a full time job in itself.
Right.
So many times the sole proprietor is so busy with it, they can't take some time. Where when you get into a partnership or a more expanded ownership, there may be other people that can watch your role while you do some of these other things.
Right.
And we see it more prevalent in um, not necessarily bigger companies, but where there are more than one key ownership
Hmm.
role.
Well, I mean, a lot of people in the, again, just kind of sticking with the single owner, they think about the value of their business when they think about exiting their business.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But I think one of the things, and tell me if you agree or disagree, that they miss is that they are creating value every single day. And at some point in time, there's a way to lock in that value
Mhm.
for that company should tragedy arise that people don't even think about. Can
Right.
you talk a little bit about key man policies? Because it's something I talk to my clients a lot about. But a key man policy, I know you guys do that there, but talk a little bit what a key man policy is.
It's a policy that basically ensures the life of a key individual to the company. And they can be designed a lot of different ways depending on the strategy and circumstance that's going on. But the real design is that when that person is no longer there, a death benefit will come in to either be available to keep the company running, to help in buyout or transition of other people. It could help fund the transition time.
Hmm.
There's a lot of different ways they could do it, but it's a really simple leveraged mechanism that allows a small amount of money to turn into a big sum in a snap when something bad happens.
And like traditional life insurance policy, but a key man policy, how do they determine how much insurance the person's insurable for?
It again on a sole proprietor
Yeah.
type situation, it really depends on what the business is making, the
Hmm.
profitability of the business. Um, and there could be other factors there, but again, each of those things is different. It's really hard to say, other than when we look at somebody doing that, there's a few different types of financial information we'd want to get
Okay.
in order to determine what they would be able to qualify for
Okay.
and what would be there, not just for today, because we want to think about the future too.
Right.
That, you know, And that's a mistake a lot of people make is today I need X. Do you expect your company to still be valued the same in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Right.
Mhm.
And why not go ahead and be planning for that future? Because you're probably not planning to not be here this year.
Right.
This is more of a just in case
Right.
scenario, but let's make sure the just in case covers whatever it's going to be when just in case happens.
Right. Right. And one of the things, just continuing to talk about key man policies. When we set up companies, usually there's buyouts, like
Mhm.
in the 4Ds we talked about. In death or disability,
Mhm.
usually somebody can buy that person that died or became permanently disabled. For divorce, if the shares or interest, whatever, goes to the non participating spouse,
Mhm.
somebody can buy it back. Maybe there's deals that take place, in there. Something, and I'm sure you run into this too, that people don't realize is that amount of buyout, where's that cash going to come from? And that's where a key man policy can come into play. But something that people don't realize is, like, for example, in death, usually the typical is in documents that are the forms that go across
Mhm.
all across the state of Texas is the other members get to buy you out. And
Mhm.
if somebody doesn't buy you out, then whoever bought out their portion of it can buy the rest of it, pro rata shares. The problem is, what if you've got a $10 million company that's grown and there's a third right there and you don't have $3 million to throw at it. Whereas the company could actually maybe redeem those shares by being able to buy using a key man policy that would allow for that money to come out. But again, this is an example of where I think what we talked about earlier is having the right team together.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
you guys do the planning, you guys do the products that need to be, the valuations and those sort of things.
Mhm.
But if the legal documents don't get adjusted for those strategies, and I've run into this a couple of times, the last couple of years, you're kind of stuck when the money, the buyout's not for the company and nobody has the cash.
Yeah.
And the kids are going, wait a minute, I thought we were out and we're going to get $3 million
Mhm.
when dad's out, and they get zero because there's no money to do
Hmm.
that. Do you guys run into that a lot?
All the time. Very rarely are the funding mechanisms in place when we look to review business documents. Many times the documents are in place and people say, well, yeah, we have a buy sell agreement,
Right.
but it's not funded.
Right.
Or, yeah, we identified key man language
We see it in our
in, in,
in our
Right.
in
document.
our documents, but there's nothing to allow that to occur.
Right.
So we see that all the time. And not just on the death side, but think about transitioning this again to the family member.
Right.
You've got the 3 kids there. You've identified someone to take it over. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't sell your business, how are you going to realize what you've built up?
Right.
So, and that's something that people don't think of a lot, especially in family businesses,
Yeah.
where, okay, well, I'm going to have, my son or daughter take over
Right.
and we're going to make this transition and this has been great and we've done quite well. But you probably put most of your money back into the business thinking this is my retirement vehicle
Right.
and I'm building this up. How do you extract that?
Right. Because I mean, if not, you have to keep on working. But if you put, your daughter in there and she's working and she's getting the paid, where are you getting paid? What are some strategies that are potential options that people look at for that type of situation where the value's all locked up in the company as intangibles, right? They're going to go to a successor that's in the family, so they're not going to get any sort of equity, exit that comes out of it. What are some options that people can look at potentially to try to have that be something from a retirement standpoint for them?
Again, time is of the essence here
Right.
because, again, a lot of times these come up with, hey, I'm looking to transfer this to my son or daughter next year.
That's right. Or this year,
And,
like I'm out.
or
By
next
December.
month,
Yeah.
I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
And if you have time, you can build vehicles into your plan that allow you to be deferring compensation that can build for you.
Mm,
And there can be a bucket of money sitting there, and it can already be tagged. When XYZ owner steps away and the children take over,
right.
this bucket can be used to fund retirement.
Mm. And that's where you said earlier, which I mean, when I heard you say 10 years, my jaw dropped a little bit. I'm like, 10 years. But when you're talking about a true succession plan, right, a comprehensive plan, in order for that to have enough time to build the value because of certain limitations, and then just even on tax matters and cash that the company is generating, it does take time to be able to build that sort of retirement that can be pulled out of the company when you leave. So now that we're talking a little bit more, even for me, I thought 10 years was too long, but actually it's not.
It's really
It's
not. I
not at
mean, if
all.
to be quite honest, I think if when we sit down and we talk about our clients and just situations we've seen, ideally, it would be great if somebody started their company, came to see you, got all their legal documents, went to see an accountant or a CPA, how are these things going to be taxed, and then came to see us and said, okay, I'm setting this up, whether it's myself or myself and one other, two others, however it is,
Right.
I need to be thinking about 30 years out.
Yep.
How is that going to look? Great. And then from there, one, you're younger most of the time. Two, you have time. There is time to put things in, where you're not, okay, well, great. You have 10 years now, this is in your this age, and for you, it's going to be this much.
Right.
It gives you a lot more leeway to do things when you're thinking of all this up front. And again, most people don't. But if you had a team of people that said, hey, this is what I do, but I also work with so and so, and you should at least seek that advice. Or I work, that's where I think people could benefit from it a lot more.
Based upon your experience, what do you think the right members of a team are for somebody to build their succession plan?
I was going to say attorneys for sure. You
Check
need,
that box.
woo,
Thank you for the plug.
you need someone to write those legal documents.
Right.
You need
Correctly, by the way. Thank you.
yes, correctly, not legal Zoom,
That's right.
and not somebody who also,
Not
is
somebody that does
somebody else
criminal
that does
defense work
this, and
either.
then yeah.
Hint, hint.
You want someone who's an accountant, CPA that
Right.
knows. This is the thing too, though, that knows business tax,
Right.
right? Because there's lots of CPAs, and I'm sure they're all great, but as entities or as corporations, the taxing on it's different. So you need to know someone that understands that. You need to have advisors, financial advisors, because there's so many different things that you can put into place that's not just stocks, shares. There's so many other things that can be put into place. And I would probably say somebody who's a really good P&C person, making sure whatever business building, equipment, things that you have,
Umbrella policies.
that are also insured.
Right.
Cover your bases, all of them.
Pete,
Go ahead.
say something really quick on that. People should take as much care in building out their team of advisors as in anything else they would think of in their life.
Sure.
Because a lot of people approach this, well, hey, John uses, so I'll just use them too.
Right.
You should really interview people and make sure they fit for where you're wanting to go and that they have those capabilities. And, when you're looking at someone on all fronts, these are people you plan to talk to for a long time.
Right.
You probably should have people that you get along with, not just someone that I see once a year, every few years as a, hey, give me a checkup. Am I okay?
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was talking to we're here at Geekdom shooting today, and I was talking to another person last week, and they were talking about insurance and everything else. I said, look, life of a company is kind of like, and this person, she was young. I said, it's kind of like, you've gotten your education, you're now formed your company, you're getting forward, and you're in your first apartment. Still need to make sure you have some things like you need to make sure that you have the four walls and water and food. That's legal documents to make sure your risk is there, and you want to have some insurance. But as you grow your company and the value grows, you need to get more sophisticated with who you're dealing with during that time as it grows. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you end up with a 450, $500,000 house, right, and cars and everything else, now there's more you need to do, to protect that value that you've done and to figure out where that value
Mm-hmm.
goes. It's the same thing with a company.
Yeah.
And there comes a point though, in my experience, it's usually once somebody starts eclipsing the valuation of $1 million or more that this stuff is a must, but usually is missed
Right.
by a lot of companies. Sometimes it's because it takes them, 15 years to get to that $1 million mark. But again, there's a growth curve that comes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you miss that mark, you miss it a lot. What do you guys think is the right, pathway for, let's say, a young company versus the more established, multi-figured valuation? What do you guys think are the right time periods for this?
We find that no matter the size,
Hmm.
no matter the duration that they've been in business, all of these things tend to be missed.
Hmm.
So, as Amanda said earlier, right when you start off, you ought to have basic things in place like this. Different companies evolve at a different rate. People have different expectations of their company.
Right.
There's some people who want to go and aggressively hit it and they
Mm-hmm.
want this thing to blow up. And their intent is perhaps I will sell it in a 5 to 10 year range. There's others that start it and say, I'm going to keep this my entire life.
Right.
But either way, you need the same pieces in place.
Sure.
And one of the things that I think triggers the reason to do some of these, one of those D's happen
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
you talked about. And until that happens, or until that happens to someone close to them,
Sure.
it's I'm good.
Right.
I don't need to do that because I don't think any of that will happen. I'll never get a divorce.
Well, if your spouse doesn't say that, then
That,
you don't really get to control that.
but there's so many things
Sure.
that like that.
Well, it's just human nature, right? Tragedy allows us to see our vulnerabilities. And
Yeah.
again, if we could go back and fix them, I mean, that's why, again, we do this is so that way people can go, I would have never thought,
Right.
Well, what happens if, my buddy dies? That's the other one. Like, would his kids have it? Would I have it? You don't think about, you don't know what you don't know until you realize it. And usually tragedy in these situations is what it is. So we've talked a lot about, family businesses, which there's a whole lot in San Antonio. I know y'all have clients. I have clients the same. Let's go a little bit bigger
Mhm.
into, a company that may be worth a couple of $1 million that has a lot of other, non-family member, but important people that are a part of it. How do you approach the conversation with the owners regarding succession planning when it's not a family-run business, but they do have a lot of great employees and a culture that they've had? How do you have those conversations? What do those look like?
We really start all our conversations at the same place,
Okay.
regardless of size, because we want to get the same basic information to start. But someone that has a larger company and there may be multiple shareholders, and they may have over 100 employees as
Right.
opposed to under 10. One of our big questions is, what do you want to happen to this when you're not here?
Right.
And again, we'll find sometimes the written document that gives a written plan
Mm-hmm.
of how things may occur, like you've described already. But very, very rarely is the funding mechanism in place.
Right.
So if you are the person and you have the majority share, and this is your baby, this is what you've done,
Right.
what do you want to have happen to this
Right.
if you're not here? And do you just want your shares absorbed?
Right.
Or are you thinking more legacy in
That's right.
terms where you want to be remembered for having this business?
Right.
You'd like people to look back and say, my gosh, look what they built, what they were able to do. I'm glad to help carry it on, but this really was this person's thing.
Hmm.
So we ask a lot of questions like that because that helps prompt us to understand what the next steps are from a planning perspective, and also to make sure that we're getting the right people like yourself involved. Because again, the documents in place may have been set up 17 years ago
That's right.
and they haven't been updated
Right.
to what this has become.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about buy sell agreements because you see a little bit more of that in the larger organizations. Can you, just for the audience, what is kind of define how you use buy sell agreements typically in those?
So typically, a buy sell agreement would be an arrangement that allows for a funding mechanism to allow you to purchase the percentage share of another individual.
Right.
And this could be just two people, or it could be a group of people.
Right.
Again, the more you get, the more complex they are.
That's right.
But you can have it in writing of, well, this is written down that now it goes to blah 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 XYZ. But what's going to fund that?
That's right. Which, as we talked about, I mean, I've run into this a couple of times where, a brother has a buy sell agreement to be able to buy out the other brother, but he's got no cash,
Yeah.
none. And so, there's a life insurance policy in the company,
Hmm.
but the brother doesn't have that. So technically, he can't ever exercise that buy sell agreement because he doesn't have enough cash to do that. And those are the problems I've seen.
And I was going to say, so when we're going and speaking to people and we're asking the clarity questions, right?
Mhm.
What exactly do you want? How is this going to work? So when we say how is this going to work? And it's funny. I was just thinking that when you said, well, we had the buy sell, there was a life insurance policy. And I hate to say it this way, but I feel like a lot of life insurance kind of gets a bad rap
Right.
for what it is. And a lot of times it's because it wasn't used correctly.
Right.
And, as you were saying about, okay, so go away from the family business. Let's talk about these big business corporations. Is there things that we do differently? And it's yes and it's no,
Hmm.
because a lot of the things are still the same that were done for the family, but maybe just on a larger scale,
Sure.
maybe on just different types of products. So from what you were saying, that person was done a disservice if they would have still done the life insurance, but maybe a different type of life insurance that
Sure.
accumulated cash. Then there would be cash there to then do the sale.
Right.
So it's really, you want someone who's been in the business, in the industry, that knows what it is they're doing, what it is you're looking for, and how strategically can you get there with what products are available. And again, that could be anywhere between stocks to life insurance, because
Right.
everything works differently
Right.
and has different tax consequences. But depending on what you need, could be this product.
Well, and this is where, when right now we're going through our startup formation boot camp, and it's for multi-owners. Every single multi-owner company, whether it's an LLC, corporation, limited partnership, it contemplates what happens on the 4Ds,
Mhm.
right? What happens if somebody dies? And there's a process for that.
Right.
But that process has to make sure that it can actually be implemented through that funding mechanism. And a lot of people just don't think about it. Now, I will say for just a second, because I'm just thinking about this, I have many companies that are formed that when somebody dies, they get to buy them out for $1.
Right.
But that's because there was a conscious decision that their value doesn't go beyond the grave. And that's okay, right? I mean, some people are like, hey, I gave them a 30% because they're running the company, it's sweat equity, but if they die, I got to get somebody else to come run it. So the buyout is $1. Well, you don't need a key
Right.
man policy for $1.
Right.
I mean, you could certainly look at doing something like that, but it doesn't make sense. Versus the fair market value, which I see so many times. Number one, fair market value, to come up with the actual number that's defensible, will cost you $30,000 to $50,000 at a minimum. To do that for a company doesn't always make sense. Two, once you come up with that number, where's the money going to come from? And you keep hearing this as a key theme. And again, I can't stress enough as an attorney to make sure that you're working with trusted advisors on how to implement what we as lawyers put in place. Because we can put great things
Mhm.
on a piece of paper that everybody agrees, but if there's no funding mechanism and there's no way to execute it, it's really worthless.
Yeah.
What do you guys look at with regard to key employees that are not family members? Do you have those kind of discussions about, worried about losing key, knowledge and those sort of things? What kind of conversations do y'all have with clients regarding, keeping third party people in the company?
Mhm.
That's a great question. Many times, the ownership is not what keeps the business going.
Hmm.
You may have an individual that really has a skill set, knowledge, experience, may have relationships with key clients that you have,
Right.
that if they aren't there, it's going to hurt your business.
Right.
And there's many different avenues to build something to keep them there.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a similar question of how important is this person to you? What happens if you lose them? What would it take to replace them?
Right.
And
Well, I think another question that we asked too is, what would it take to retain them?
and
Hmm.
replace or retain. And we help put things in place to do both.
Okay.
And let's just say, God forbid, that person passed away,
Right.
accident, illness, whatever it is, and they possess a particular skill set that is just not on the street.
Right.
And you may have to go not just local search, but a statewide or nationwide search to keep your business going at the level it's going.
Hmm.
Search firms are expensive.
They are.
And, but
20 to 30% of the first year or maybe multiple years of employment revenue or employment expense for that. It's super expensive.
so where would that money come from?
Right.
And now companies are put in a position of, am I okay doing 30 or 40% less in
Right.
sales or production and we'll just adjust to it? Or do I pay the money in order to get that skill set back in so I can stay at my level or even keep going up? Much like other conversations, where does the funding come from?
Right.
And we help develop those types of plans. We talked about, what if something bad happened to them?
Right.
What if your competitor, your key competitor, comes and offers them something to go to work for them?
Right.
It's the same type of thing. What can you have in place that incentivizes them to stay with you?
Right.
So we help do that. And something that's out there that we use a lot of times is called a golden handcuffs
Right.
plan, where there is something down the road that is beneficial for the owner, but also for that key person,
Mhm.
for them to stay with the company for an extended period of time.
Sure. And from a golden handcuffs concept, some of the things that we use: phantom stock,
Mhm.
phantom units, if it's an LLC. And what that is, for those of you that are listening, is it's not actual ownership in the company. It is a contractual right that mirrors what ownership would look like. So
Mhm.
if there's a distribution that the LLC makes, this person would get 5% as though they were an owner. It's an expense of the company. It's not actually an
Mhm.
equity distribution, but it makes them feel connected and incentivized to stay. On the corporation side, we can use incentive plans to
Mhm.
have restricted stock grants, stock options, those sort of things. That, again, that's true ownership. But when we
Mhm.
start doing those, it handcuffs them because they can get clawed back. They can lose them if they leave their employment. So it incentivizes them to stay with the company during those times, which it doesn't fit everybody. But for
Right.
those people that are huge knowledge, non-owner, but knowledge that could cripple a company, these are things that people just, well, I treat them right, they'll never go anywhere. Well, at some point in time, the competitor comes knocking, and just like we see in college football, they'll pay more money and take your,
Yeah.
your key person away from you. Do you guys use those in your plans as well with talking with
We do.
clients?
We do. And again, it really depends on how long you're wanting to keep them. What is the extent that you want to keep them at? And again, we use a lot of different vehicles to help fund those, um, from discussions where you started all
Right.
the way to things that can, you know, grow at various tax implications, pre-tax, after tax, whatever best fits the company.
So as we kind of wind up here, I've got some just kind of rapid fire questions for both of you. So one is kind of, it feels like it's a marriage game here. Which one would say which one? All right, let's see if you agree or disagree. All right, you ready? I've got
Ready.
three of them.
Okay.
Number one, what is the most underused product by a company owner for succession planning, for just preparing for the future? What's, we've talked about some other products. What's the number one that just everybody misses? It's really simple. They just miss it. What's the number
Life
one?
insurance.
Life insurance. Amanda?
No, I agree. Life insurance.
This is interesting. We'll see if they keep agreeing on stuff. Why do you think that people miss the life insurance part? I mean, there's so many people that try to sell life insurance out there. I mean, they're not coming with their suitcases to your house anymore. Why do they miss it?
Well, and that's the reason. There's so many. Like I had said, in my opinion, it's gotten such a bad rap. You really think it's just for when you die. There's not anything for when you're living, and that's just not true. I think, just as with every other product, things have gotten so much more sophisticated. Life insurance has gotten so much more sophisticated,
Right.
and there's actually so many things you can do with that plan. And again, I'm not talking your term life insurance. I'm talking the more permanent type life insurance that accumulates cash value, that is tax free, that I think people just don't ever sit down and think about it. And mainly, they also get told by, as we like to call them, talking heads that say, "Oh, don't, that stuff's not good." And that's not the case, because it's not the case like that for everybody.
Right. Because, yeah, I mean, again, as we said, this is not one size fits all by any
Mhm.
means. Um, what is the most, what person on the team for most companies do you talk to? What person, key person on their team are they missing? So we talked about a team earlier. Which one are they missing? I'm going to actually have mine too when we get to the end of this.
Um, I think many times they are missing us.
Okay.
And I say that because maybe they bought a policy or they've got an investment over here. They
Many times they bought a
th-
GNL policy
or
somewhere, right?
but
Just to be able to check the
they
box.
think they're good.
Right.
And um, we'll find legal documents many times. We'll find that they use a tax person of some level,
Yep.
but they don't tend to look for a specialist on this side of the fence that can really help them, build their business for the future and protect their business, but also protect their financial interests
Right.
long term. And again, what would you like to say?
Which one do you think?
It's kind of, to me, it's a little bit all over the place, because you see sometimes they have a good attorney, a lot of times they have a bad attorney.
You're right.
So many times we get asked for referrals to a CPA,
Right.
because same thing, there's a lot of CPAs, but do they really know tax, business tax? But it's also us, where they may have somebody that is, as I say, growing their money, they're accumulating their money. But other than that, it's not really helping with the company. It's not helping to transition anything. It's not helping for, all the other items that are needed. So to me, it's kind of, they're just missing advisors, to be
There you go.
honest.
Amanda took my answer to that one.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the problem,
Right.
is that lack of education or understanding on the advisor side,
Hmm.
as to, you wouldn't go to an estate planning attorney to do your business documents,
But they do.
but they do.
Hmm.
Just like
Just
you,
like people come to me and ask me to do a will, but I
Yeah.
don't.
but in the same token, they may need a CPA, but they'll gladly go to a tax preparer
Hmm.
because it costs less.
That's right.
Yeah.
And on our side, instead of going to someone who specializes in business planning, I'll just go to this guy that also may do my PNC stuff, and I
Right.
think I get the same thing.
That's right. Because I know.
And you don't get the same thing.
Well, in my experience, and this just comes from, being even in house and in house counsel and those sort of things. We as lawyers, we don't generate revenue,
Mhm.
right? We're an expense. I don't have a corresponding unless there's a settlement, which then people think it's fantastic, or we negotiate an exit, which we do a lot of M&A work. But in general, to talk to a lawyer to plan, right? That's an expense. For a CPA, it's the exact same thing. It's an
Mhm.
expense. And people are usually like, I'm going to scrimp on the expenses like that because I'm going to spend it where I can go make my money. But here's what I would say, and this is what I've said for years is lawyers, CPAs, the right whole advisory team, because they would say, "Oh, I don't need you. You're too that's not what I need." Wrong. The team is what allows you to keep the value that you've generated. And you can keep generating, generating, and generating. But again, as we've talked about today, in a lot of circumstances, tragedy will destroy that completely
Mhm.
unless you've properly planned, with the right team that's there.
Mhm.
Or, worse, you've used, the estate planner to do your business documents. You've used the tax preparer to the CPA. You get to the end of this and you realize you just created a tax bill that is insurmountable for everybody, that everybody just goes, I don't want it. I don't want that. I don't have any money to pay those taxes. Y'all just messed it all up. I disavow all of that, and the company is destroyed because you didn't have the right team.
Right.
They don't want to pay the money because they think it's an expense, as opposed to something that protects that value of that asset that they've been working their entire lives on in many
Yeah.
circumstances.
And I'm sure you see it as much as we do, where we sit down with somebody who finally has decided, right, okay, it's the time, I'm going to come do this. Um, for a lot of the, especially business attorney or business planning, we ask for tax returns or
Right.
things of that, to kind of see where everything's going. And there's many times we will sit there and they, oh, I did it with, so and so down the street because so and so said it. It's not even right. I've been
Right.
getting letters, and I don't know how many times that's actually happened where
Right.
people are, yeah, well, I thought I was doing it right. Or I've actually even also encountered so many people doing it their own,
Right.
using the software, saying, well, I do my own and I think it's right, but I've been getting, and I'm like, did you go to school for this? Did you,
Right.
is this something you do on a daily occurrence? And I think that's what kind of separates us from all those others is
Right.
go and research somebody, make sure this is what they do this on a daily basis. They have the licenses, they're educated, they're, all those things that, yes, and yeah, put in the money for the expense because it's going to pay itself at the end.
Right. Well, I mean, just like anything, right? I mean, it costs money.
Right.
And if you do it on the cheap by finding, somebody to do it the cheapest, you're going to get the lowest strategy possible, which actually may be no strategy at
I
all.
was going to say, or no strategy.
Right.
Right.
I mean, it takes money. I mean, and the clients that I've got that are fantastic, when I'm telling them, be prepared to spend, 10, 20, 30, maybe $40,000, depending upon what the issues are, to get it resolved. But when you're talking about a $15 million company, to
Right.
make sure that their strategy is correct, that's almost a no-brainer, at that point in time. That doesn't have to be like that for everybody, not by any means, but that's been my
Mhm.
problem as well, as like a CPA. Okay, well, all right, you've got this unique strategy of all these different entities. How does it all roll up? Well, I watched a TikTok video. That's not usually the people today, but I think in 10
Right.
years that's what we're going to hear. Well, this TikTok video
They told
said
me
I
just to
needed
set
this
up
with a
an
trust and
LLC
everything
and
else, and you're
yeah.
going, well, that kind of messes up everything.
Yeah.
There used to be a commercial, I would say 20, 30 years ago, probably dates me a little bit. But in the commercial, they said, and it was about a repair shop.
Mm.
And they said, you can pay me now or you can pay
Right.
me later.
Right.
And as both of you have been saying, do you want to make an investment into your business and your future so that when the time comes, that whatever happens, you're in good place? Or do you want to think of it as an expense that I'm trying to minimize that and deal with it later, because the later, it's still going to be there.
And you can't control that later usually.
That's right.
Right. All right, last question for you
Okay.
both. What would be the number one piece of advice you would give someone that has watched this and says, I'm interested in succession planning? What would be your advice?
Hmm.
I'll let you go first.
David's like,
Well,
oh, I need a little bit of time to think about that one. I'm going to pass this one to Amanda.
well, I mean, I would say the first piece of advice, right, is to give us a call if you think you're ready and or even you just want to know what are the options,
Right.
what is it that I should be thinking of, because quite honestly, a lot of what we do is education, much like you.
Hmm.
There's many times we have sat with somebody and just said, well, have you thought of this? And maybe it's not even something we do. We say, you know what, you really need to go sit down with so and so first.
Right.
That's your first step. So I would say it would be that is if you're thinking of it, just give us a call. Purely educational.
And we'll have the contact information is there in the description. So that way you can get a hold of David and Amanda. David, did you have anything else?
Just know where you are right now.
Hmm.
You know, we've talked about different types of documents, we've talked about different funding mechanisms. Take a look into that and think about where you want to go. And when you're doing that, look for some trusted people to do it with.
I can't agree any more than that. So, my last little advice is we've got our boot camp going right now. We've got our courses online, a lot of documents just to get the core documents
Mhm.
there. We've got an education course that will explain in depth buy sell agreements, how those work, and whether it's right for your situation. You can use that education to start knowing more because it's knowledge.
Mhm.
Thank y'all so much for coming and talking about this because this knowledge nobody talks about really
Right.
until tragedy. And they'll talk a little bit about their friends and then everybody just goes upon their way. But being proactive just saves so much for the future. I can't thank you guys enough for coming by.
Well,
Well,
thank
thank you
you.
very much.
Thanks for watching the South Texas Power Lunch. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is something that people don't think about until it's too late, and usually your options are really limited. For everyone that's been watching on YouTube, thanks so much. Hit a like button, subscribe so that way you don't miss our episodes. If you're listening to us through Spotify, Apple Music, or one of our other partners, click subscribe, leave us a comment, let us know that we're adding value. We'll see you next time.